My dad refused to walk me down the aisle because of my sister's yoga retreat, so I had a celebrity do it instead. What happened next exposed a family secret that changed everything I thought I knew about my childhood. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I'm Grace, 29 years old, and I've spent my entire life living in the shadow of my sister Brooklyn. Not just any shadow, the kind of suffocating darkness that makes you question if you even exist. Brooklyn wasn't just the favorite child. She was the entire solar system our family revolved around, while I was some distant asteroid nobody bothered to name. Brooklyn had this effortless way of commanding attention from the moment she learned to walk. 2 years younger than me, but somehow always ahead in everything that mattered to our parents. While I struggled through piano lessons, Brooklyn was composing melodies. While I brought home B+ report cards, Brooklyn was getting awards for academic excellence. The worst part wasn't even her success. It was how she seemed genuinely surprised that not everyone received the same level of worship she did. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, our house felt like a shrine to Brooklyn's achievements. The living room walls were covered with her dance recital photos, debate team trophies, and certificates from various competitions. My own accomplishments were relegated to the refrigerator, held up by novelty magnets that eventually got replaced by Brooklyn's honor roll certificates. Dad owned a successful construction company, Martinez and Associates, which sounds impressive until you realize the associates were mostly just him and 2 part-time workers. But he talked about it like he was running some corporate empire, always stressed about contracts and deadlines. Mom worked part-time at a dental office and spent the rest of her energy managing Brooklyn's packed schedule of activities. The pattern started early. When I was 8 and Brooklyn was 6, we both got sick with the flu in the same week. I remember lying in bed, fever burning through my small body, listening to Mom fuss over Brooklyn in the next room. She got the special soup, the cool washcloths, the constant check-ins. I got a bottle of children's Tylenol left on my nightstand and instructions to try to get some rest, sweetheart. School events were the worst. Brooklyn's elementary school graduation was treated like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. Dad took the afternoon off work, Mom bought a new dress, and they invited both sets of grandparents. When my middle school honor society induction came around 2 years later, they showed up 20 minutes late because Brooklyn had a last-minute dance rehearsal that ran over. They sat in the back, whispering about how long the ceremony was taking. High school was when favoritism became impossible to ignore. Brooklyn joined the drama club, and suddenly every family conversation revolved around her upcoming performances. She landed the lead role in Our Town during her sophomore year, and you'd think she'd been cast in a Broadway production. Dad rearranged his work schedule to attend every single performance, all 4 shows. He even brought flowers each night. Meanwhile, I'd joined the school newspaper and worked my way up to editor-in-chief by senior year. It was actually a big deal. Our paper won a state award for investigative journalism after I wrote a series exposing safety violations in the school's aging infrastructure. Dad's response when I showed him the award? "That's nice, honey. Did you know Brooklyn got callbacks for the spring musical?" The college application process revealed just how deep the divide ran. Brooklyn applied to prestigious performing arts schools across the country, and suddenly our dining room table became mission control for her future. Dad helped her research scholarship opportunities, Mom drove her to auditions in different cities, and they hired a consultant to help polish her application essays. When I announced I'd gotten accepted to Arizona State University with a partial journalism scholarship, the reaction was politely enthusiastic, the kind of response you give when a distant relative tells you about their vacation. "That's wonderful, Grace," Mom said, already turning back to Brooklyn's acceptance letter from Juilliard. Brooklyn thrived in New York, studying musical theater and sending home constant updates about her classes, her performances, her amazing roommate, her incredible professors. Every phone call home became a Brooklyn appreciation session. Dad would put her on speakerphone so the whole family could bask in her latest triumph. I stayed local for college, partly because of the scholarship, but mostly because I wasn't sure anyone would notice if I moved across the country. I threw myself into journalism, interning at the Phoenix Tribune during summers and eventually landing a staff position after graduation. It was good work, meaningful work, but it didn't come with the glamorous stories that Brooklyn's New York adventures provided. The divide became even more obvious during holidays. Brooklyn's visits home were treated like royal arrivals. Mom would spend days preparing her favorite meals, Dad would clear his schedule to spend time with her, and family dinners turned into Brooklyn, sharing stories about her latest auditions and the fascinating people she'd met in the theater world. I'd sit at these dinners, contributing when I could, but feeling like a background character in someone else's story. When I tried to share news about my work, interviewing the mayor about city budget cuts, or covering a corruption scandal in the county commissioner's office, the conversation would quickly shift back to whether Brooklyn had heard back about that commercial audition. The pet situation was particularly telling. I'd always wanted a dog, begging for years as a kid. Dogs are too much responsibility, Dad would say. Maybe when you're older. When Brooklyn moved to New York and mentioned feeling lonely in her tiny apartment, Dad immediately offered to help her get a cat. He researched pet-friendly apartments, drove to 3 different shelters with her during winter break, and set up monthly payments for pet insurance. I finally got my dog, Charlie, when I moved into my own apartment at 25. He's a golden retriever mix I rescued from the local shelter, and he's been the most loyal companion I've ever had. Dad's reaction when I brought Charlie to a family barbecue? I hope you know what you're getting into. Dogs are expensive. Brooklyn graduated from Juilliard with honors and moved to Los Angeles to pursue her acting career. The family group chat became a constant stream of updates about her headshots, her agent meetings, her callback for a commercial that would change everything. When she landed a small recurring role on a cable TV drama, you'd think she'd won an Oscar. That's when I met David, a fellow journalist who covered sports for a rival newspaper. He was kind, funny, and had this way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the room. More importantly, he noticed the family dynamics immediately. After his first Martinez family dinner, he pulled me aside and asked, "Is it always like that?" "Like what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Like you're invisible," he said gently. "Your parents barely acknowledged anything you said all evening." Dating David made me realize how abnormal my family situation really was. His parents were excited to meet me, asked about my work, and treated both their children with equal interest and pride. Spending time with his family was like visiting an alternate universe, where parents actually saw their kids as individuals, rather than ranking them in order of preference. When David proposed after 2 years together, I was over the moon. He'd planned this elaborate surprise at the Phoenix Zoo, where we'd had our first official date. As we called our families to share the news, the contrast was stark. David's parents screamed with excitement and immediately started planning a celebration dinner. My parents' reaction was more subdued. Congratulations, of course, but followed immediately by concerns about timing and logistics. "Brooklyn's pilot season is coming up," Mom said. "She might not be able to travel for a wedding if it conflicts with auditions." Even my engagement announcement had to be filtered through Brooklyn's schedule. Dad did offer to contribute to the wedding costs, which surprised me. For a moment, I thought maybe this would be my chance to finally have something that was just mine. Something where I could be the center of attention for once. I should have known better. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The venue search became another opportunity for family input. Dad had opinions about everything: the cost, the location, the capacity. "You don't want something too fancy," he'd say. "Simple is better." Meanwhile, Brooklyn called from LA with suggestions for photographers she'd worked with and makeup artists who really understood lighting. I chose a beautiful garden venue in Scottsdale, a place that felt magical and intimate. The coordinator was flexible about our budget, and they had this gorgeous pergola where the ceremony would take place. Charlie would be our ring bearer, wearing a tiny tuxedo harness that made him look ridiculously dignified. David's family embraced every detail with enthusiasm. His mom helped me find my dress, his dad offered to handle the music playlist, and his sister volunteered to coordinate the flowers. It felt like being welcomed into a family that actually functioned. The contrast with my own family became more apparent as planning progressed. Dad attended exactly 2 venue visits, spending most of the time on his phone dealing with work calls. Mom was more involved but kept making suggestions based on what she thought Brooklyn would prefer. Brooklyn always said she wanted an outdoor wedding, she'd say, as if Brooklyn's hypothetical wedding preferences should influence my actual wedding. 3 months before the wedding, Brooklyn announced she'd been cast in an independent film shooting in Vancouver. The timing would conflict with my wedding date, but she was sure she could make it work. "It's only a 3-week shoot," she said during our family video call. "I'll fly on Friday night and leave Sunday morning. It'll be tight, but I'll make it happen." I appreciated that she was trying to prioritize my wedding, but even her scheduling conflicts became a family drama. Dad worried about her missing important career opportunities. Mom suggested we could move the wedding date to accommodate her filming schedule. The fact that we'd already sent save the dates and booked vendors didn't seem to factor into their concerns. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. My wedding was just another event that had to work around Brooklyn's life. Even on what was supposed to be my special day, she was still the sun everyone else orbited around. I'd spent 29 years trying to earn a place in my own family, and I was about to walk down the aisle still fighting for scraps of attention. But I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about why I'd been treated like the spare child was about to be turned completely upside down. The first crack in my carefully constructed wedding plans came 6 weeks before the ceremony. Brooklyn called during one of her dramatic phases, the kind where every conversation sounded like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "Grace, I have some news," she said, her voice carrying that theatrical weight she'd perfected in drama school. "The film got picked up for additional scenes. They want to extend my contract." I was at work, trying to finish an article about municipal water rights, when her call came through. Charlie was lying under my desk, something he'd learned to do during my more stressful deadline days. "That's great, Brooklyn, congratulations." I meant it, even though I could sense what was coming next. "The thing is, they want to shoot the additional scenes the weekend of your wedding. I tried to negotiate, but you know how these independent productions are. If you're not available when they need you, they'll just recast." There it was, the familiar feeling of being the secondary consideration in my own life events. "So you can't make it to the wedding?" "I didn't say that," she said quickly. "I'm still trying to figure something out. Maybe I can fly on Saturday morning and leave that night. It would be cutting it close, but..." "Brooklyn, don't stress about it. Your career is important." The words came out automatically, the same script I'd been reciting my whole life. Support Brooklyn's dreams, be understanding about her priorities, don't make waves. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was having David in my life, someone who actually prioritized me, that made the contrast more obvious. After hanging up, I sat in my cubicle staring at the half-finished article on my screen. Charlie sensed my mood and rested his chin on my foot, a gesture that somehow made everything worse and better at the same time. That evening, I told David about Brooklyn's conflict while we walked Charlie around our neighborhood. The desert sunset painted everything in shades of orange and pink, one of those Arizona evenings that made you forget about the brutal summer heat. "How do you feel about it?" David asked, which was such a David question. He never told me how I should feel, he just created space for me to figure it out myself. "Honestly, relieved." The admission surprised me. "Is that terrible?" "Not terrible at all. This is your wedding day, not the Brooklyn Appreciation Society annual meeting." I laughed, but there was truth in his joke that stung a little. How many of my life events had become occasions to celebrate Brooklyn instead? 2 weeks later, Dad called with what he presented as good news. Brooklyn's film had been selected for a prestigious independent film festival, with screenings scheduled for the same weekend as my wedding. "This could be huge for her career," Dad said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "The kind of exposure that could change everything." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for her success, while simultaneously dreading where this conversation was headed. "The festival is in Portland, and they want the main cast there for Q&A sessions, industry mixers, the whole thing. Brooklyn's devastated about missing your wedding, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I found myself nodding along, even though he couldn't see me through the phone. This was how these conversations always went. Brooklyn's needs presented as facts of nature, immovable and unquestionable, while everyone else adjusted accordingly. "Of course she should go," I heard myself saying. This is exactly the kind of break she's been working toward. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so supportive of your sister. After hanging up, I realized I'd just given my blessing for Brooklyn to miss my wedding without anyone actually asking if I was okay with it. The decision had been made, presented to me as inevitable, and I'd played my part perfectly. David found me sitting on our back patio, Charlie sprawled across my lap like a 70-pound therapy blanket. "Brooklyn's not coming to the wedding," I announced without preamble. Film conflict? Film festival. Big opportunity, career-defining moment. All the usual reasons. David sat beside me, not saying anything for a moment. One of the things I loved about him was his ability to sit with silence, instead of rushing to fill it with platitudes. "How are your parents handling it?" That was the question I'd been avoiding thinking about. Dad called to tell me. He seemed more excited about Brooklyn's festival than he's ever been about our wedding. "And your mom?" She sent me a text suggesting we live stream the ceremony so Brooklyn can watch from Portland. Like my wedding is a YouTube video she can catch up on later. The live stream suggestion had arrived an hour after Dad's call, accompanied by links to various streaming services and a note about how technology makes it so easy to include everyone these days. Mom meant well, but the implication was clear. Brooklyn's absence was a problem to be solved with creative workarounds rather than a choice she was making. 3 weeks before the wedding, the family dynamics shifted into overdrive. Brooklyn started posting constantly on social media about her film festival preparation, her outfit choices for various events, her excitement about meeting industry professionals. Each post felt like a reminder of where the family's attention was focused. Meanwhile, my own pre-wedding stress was mounting. The caterer needed final head counts, the florist was asking about ceremony timing, and I still hadn't figured out what to do about the father-daughter dance portion of the reception. Dad had promised to be there, but his enthusiasm felt obligatory rather than genuine. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine family dinner. David and I drove out to my parents' house in Ahwatukee for Sunday dinner, something we did monthly when our schedules allowed. Mom had made her famous enchiladas, and Dad was in an unusually good mood because he'd just landed a major commercial renovation contract. The conversation naturally drifted to wedding planning. I mentioned that we'd finalized the menu and confirmed the photographer's timeline. Normal pre-wedding logistics that should have generated some parental excitement. Instead, Dad's phone buzzed with a text from Brooklyn, and suddenly the entire dinner conversation pivoted to her latest update from the film set. She'd apparently impressed the director with her improvisation skills and might get additional dialogue in her scenes. "That girl's going places," Dad said, scrolling through Brooklyn's messages. "Natural talent, real drive. She's got what it takes to make it in that business." I sat there, picking at my enchiladas, watching my father beam with pride over my sister's text messages, while my actual wedding planning received polite acknowledgement at best. "Grace has been doing amazing work at the Tribune," David interjected, trying to redirect some attention my way. "Her investigation into the city council's budget irregularities got picked up by the Associated Press." "That's nice," Mom said absently, still reading over Dad's shoulder as he showed her Brooklyn's photos from the film set. Nice. My biggest professional achievement to date was nice. That night, driving home through the desert darkness, David finally voiced what we'd both been thinking. "Your parents are going to find a way to miss your wedding, aren't they?" I'd been dreading this conversation, but David's gentle directness made it impossible to avoid. Dad promised he'd walk me down the aisle. When did he promise that? I tried to remember the exact conversation, but realized I couldn't pin down a specific moment. It had been more of an assumption, something we'd talked about in general terms but never actually confirmed with concrete commitment. "Grace," David said carefully, "when was the last time your dad followed through on something important to you when it conflicted with Brooklyn's needs?" The question hung between us like a challenge I wasn't ready to accept. Because accepting it meant acknowledging something I'd spent my entire life trying not to see. That I was always going to be the expendable child, the one whose needs got sacrificed for Brooklyn's dreams. 2 weeks before the wedding, my phone rang at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Dad's name on the caller ID filled me with immediate dread. Good news never came that early on weekends. "Grace, I need to talk to you about something." Charlie lifted his head from his dog bed, reading my tension like he always did. "What's wrong?" Nothing's wrong, exactly. It's just, Brooklyn called last night. The film festival extended her stay. They want her to attend some industry events the following week, networking opportunities that could lead to representation by a major talent agency. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was headed. She's asking if we might consider postponing the wedding by a month, just to give her time to handle this career opportunity and still be there for your big day. Postponing my wedding for Brooklyn's networking events. Dad, we can't postpone the wedding. We have 150 guests, vendors, and a venue contract. David's family has already made travel arrangements. I know. It was just a thought. Brooklyn feels terrible about the timing. If she feels so terrible, she could choose to prioritize her sister's wedding over a networking event. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of pretending this was just unfortunate timing rather than a pattern of choices. Grace, you know Brooklyn would be there if she could. This industry is incredibly competitive. Opportunities like this don't come around often. And weddings do. Silence on the other end of the line. Look, Dad, I understand Brooklyn has important career stuff happening, but I'm not postponing my wedding. If she can't make it, she can't make it. Of course, I didn't mean to suggest, I just thought I'd ask. But there was something else in his voice, a hesitation that made my stomach drop. Dad, you're still planning to walk me down the aisle, right? Another pause, longer this time. Well, that's actually the other thing I wanted to discuss. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Charlie must have sensed the shift in my energy because he patted over and pressed against my legs, his warm weight grounding me for whatever was coming next. Brooklyn asked if I might consider flying up to Portland for the festival, just for the weekend. She's never had family support at one of these industry events, and she thinks having me there could make a real difference for her networking. I stared out the window at the Saturday morning joggers passing by our apartment complex, their normal weekend routines suddenly seeming like luxuries from another universe. Dad, that's my wedding weekend. I know, sweetheart, I know, but Brooklyn's panel discussion is Saturday afternoon, the same time as your ceremony. She specifically requested that I introduce her to some of the producers and directors she'll be meeting. Having family there apparently makes you seem more grounded, more professional. The casual way he said sweetheart while destroying my wedding day was almost impressive in its cruelty. So you're choosing Brooklyn's networking event over walking me down the aisle. It's not that simple, Grace. This could be the break she's been working toward her entire life. These festivals can make careers. And what about my career, my life, my wedding? You're different, Grace. You've always been so independent, so capable of handling things on your own. Brooklyn needs more support. There it was, the excuse that had justified 29 years of neglect, wrapped up in a compliment that felt like a slap. I was being punished for my resilience, for learning to survive without the parental attention that had always flowed exclusively toward Brooklyn. I need you too, Dad. I've needed you my whole life. Of course you do, honey, but this is just one day. You'll have David there, his family, all your friends. Brooklyn will be in a room full of strangers, trying to make the most important professional connections of her life. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but I stopped listening after he used the phrase, "You'll understand when you're older." I was 29 years old, about to get married, and my father was treating me like a child who couldn't grasp the complexity of adult decisions. When I finally hung up, I sat on my couch in stunned silence. Charlie climbed up beside me, something he wasn't usually allowed to do, but somehow knew I needed the comfort more than I needed clean furniture. David found me there an hour later when he returned from his morning bike ride. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. "He's not coming," David said, not really a question. Brooklyn's film festival, more important than our wedding, apparently. David sat beside me, still in his cycling gear, and pulled me against his chest. I breathed in the familiar scent of his post-workout cologne mixed with Arizona sunshine. "I'm sorry," he said simply, which was exactly what I needed to hear, not explanations or silver linings or attempts to make sense of my father's choice. Just acknowledge that this hurt. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I can't walk down the aisle alone. I'll look pathetic." "You could never look pathetic," David said firmly, but we'll figure something out. We have 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find someone to fill the father-shaped hole in my wedding ceremony. 2 weeks to pretend this betrayal wasn't devastating. 2 weeks to act like I was fine with being abandoned on the most important day of my life. The next few days passed in a blur of logistics and emotional damage control. I called my grandfather on my mom's side, but his arthritis had gotten worse, and he wasn't confident about walking on uneven garden paths. David's father offered immediately, which was sweet but felt wrong somehow. This wasn't his responsibility to fix. My brother-in-law, Jake, married to my older cousin, volunteered as well, but again, it felt like asking someone to clean up a mess they hadn't made. Mom called on Tuesday to check in about the wedding plans, as if Dad's abandonment was just another detail to manage rather than a fundamental betrayal of the father-daughter relationship. Maybe we could ask Pastor Williams from our old church, she suggested. He's known you since you were little. Mom, I haven't been to that church in 15 years, and he's 83 years old. Well, what about David's uncle? The one who lives in Flagstaff? She was treating this like a staffing problem rather than an emotional crisis. Find a warm body to walk me down the aisle, check it off the list, move on to centerpiece arrangements. Have you talked to Dad about this? I asked. He feels terrible about the timing, Grace, he really does. But Brooklyn specifically asked for his support, and you know how hard it is for her to ask for help. There it was again. Brooklyn's needs are presented as facts of nature, immutable and beyond question. What about my needs, Mom? You have David's whole family there, sweetheart. Brooklyn will be all alone in Portland. By Thursday, I was spiraling. The wedding was 10 days away, and I still had no idea who would walk me down the aisle. Every conversation with a potential substitute felt like admitting that my own father found me so unimportant that he could easily skip the most significant day of my life. That evening, while David was at a work event, I took Charlie to our neighborhood dog park. It was one of those perfect Arizona spring evenings, with temperatures in the 70s and a slight breeze that made the palm trees whisper. Charlie immediately found his favorite tennis ball and started his usual routine of bringing it to every person in the park, hoping someone would throw it for him. I was sitting on a bench watching Charlie work his charm on a family with 2 young kids, when a familiar voice said, "Excuse me, is that your dog?" I looked up to see Marcus Thompson, the local news anchor for Channel 12. He was even more polished in person than on television, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of smile that probably cost a fortune in dental work. "Yes, that's Charlie," I said, wondering if my dog had somehow violated park etiquette. "He's beautiful. Golden Retriever mix?" That's what the shelter said, though I think there might be some lab in there too. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that was warmer than his television persona. I have a soft spot for rescue dogs. I had a shepherd mix for 12 years before I lost him last fall. We talked for a few minutes about dogs, the park, and the beautiful weather. Marcus mentioned that he lived in the neighborhood and came to the dog park regularly, though this was the first time our paths had crossed. "You look familiar," he said as Charlie returned with his tennis ball, now thoroughly slobbered. "Do we know each other from somewhere?" "I'm a journalist at the Tribune, Grace Martinez. I've been to some of the same press conferences you have." "Martinez, yes, I know your work. You did that great series on the water rights controversy. Really solid investigative reporting." It was the first time in weeks that someone had complimented my professional work without immediately comparing it to Brooklyn's acting career. "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from someone with your experience." We chatted for another 15 minutes about journalism, the challenges of local news, and the changing media landscape. Marcus was surprisingly down to earth for someone who was essentially a local celebrity. He asked thoughtful questions about my beat and seemed genuinely interested in the municipal politics I covered. As we were getting ready to leave, Marcus mentioned that he was between projects at the station. "Pilot season's slow for local news too," he said with a grin. "If you ever need a fresh perspective on a story, feel free to reach out. I love collaborating with print journalists." He handed me his business card, and I noticed it had his personal cell number written on the back. "Thanks," I said, tucking the card into my pocket. "I might take you up on that." Walking home with Charlie, I found myself thinking about Marcus's kindness to a stranger in a dog park. He'd taken time out of his evening to have a genuine conversation with someone he barely knew, showed real interest in my work, and offered professional collaboration without expecting anything in return. The contrast with my father's behavior was stark. Here was someone I'd just met treating me with more consideration and respect than my own dad had shown regarding my wedding. That night I told David about meeting Marcus at the dog park. The Channel 12 guy, he seems decent enough on air. He was really nice, asked about my work, talked about his dog. Just normal, respectful conversation. That's refreshing, considering the week you've been having. David was right. After days of family members treating my wedding like an inconvenient scheduling conflict, a simple conversation with someone who saw me as a person, rather than a problem to be managed, felt revolutionary. Friday morning, exactly 1 week before my wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was scrolling through my contacts, still trying to figure out the aisle situation, when I saw Marcus's business card sitting on my kitchen counter. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed his number. Marcus Thompson. Hi Marcus, this is Grace Martinez. We met at the dog park yesterday. Grace? Hi, how are you? Is Charlie doing well? Charlie's great, thanks for asking. Listen, I have kind of an unusual question, and please feel free to say no if it's weird or inappropriate. I'm intrigued. Go ahead. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The wedding, my father's abandonment, Brooklyn's film festival, my desperate need for someone to walk me down the aisle. I explained that I knew it was a strange request, that we'd only just met, but that I was running out of options and time. You want me to walk you down the aisle at your wedding? He asked, and I couldn't read his tone. I know it sounds crazy. We barely know each other, and you're probably busy, and it's a lot to ask of someone. Grace, he interrupted gently, when's the wedding? Next Saturday, the 23rd, at Desert Botanical Garden in Scottsdale. Beautiful venue, and you said your father chose to attend your sister's film festival instead. He thinks her career needs are more important than my wedding day. There was a pause, and I held my breath. I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle, Grace. Nobody should have to face their wedding day feeling abandoned by their family. I started crying right there on the phone, relief and gratitude overwhelming me in equal measure. Really? You'd do that? Absolutely. Email me the details, and I'll clear my schedule. This is going to be a beautiful wedding, and you deserve to have someone there who's genuinely excited to support you. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at Charlie, who was looking at me with his usual expression of complete confidence in my decisions. I just asked a news anchor I met at a dog park to walk me down the aisle, I told him. Charlie wagged his tail approvingly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. The week leading up to my wedding transformed from a nightmare into something I never expected. Actually enjoyable. With Marcus confirmed to walk me down the aisle, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But what surprised me most was how invested he became in making sure everything was perfect. Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Coffee this afternoon? I want to discuss wedding logistics and get to know each other better before Saturday. Can't have a stranger walking you down the aisle. We met at a small cafe in Old Town Scottsdale, away from the usual spots where I might run into coworkers or family friends. Marcus arrived 5 minutes early, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, looking more like a regular guy than a television personality. First things first, he said after we ordered our drinks, tell me about David. I want to know what kind of man I'm symbolically handing you over to. For the next hour, I found myself sharing stories about David that I'd never told anyone. How he'd noticed my family dynamics immediately but never made me feel ashamed about them. How he'd supported my career ambitions without trying to manage or fix them. How he made me laugh even on my worst days at work. He sounds like a keeper, Marcus said, stirring sugar into his second cup of coffee. What made you know he was the one? Last year, I was working on a story about city budget cuts that was getting killed by my editor. David found me crying in my car in the Tribune parking lot because I was so frustrated about the corruption I couldn't expose. Instead of giving me advice or trying to fix it, he just sat with me for an hour, then took me for ice cream. He let you feel your feelings without trying to manage them. Exactly, my family has never done that. Everything's always about finding solutions or moving past problems as quickly as possible. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's why your father's choice stings so much. It's not just about missing one day, it's about a lifetime pattern of dismissing your emotions. I stared at him across the small cafe table, surprised by his insight. Are you secretly a therapist in addition to being a news anchor? He laughed. 3 years of therapy after my divorce. You learn to recognize patterns. Over the next few days, Marcus proved to be the most attentive wedding party member I'd ever encountered. He called Wednesday to confirm the timeline and ask about parking logistics. Thursday, he texted to check if there was anything special he should know about the ceremony or reception traditions. Friday morning, he sent a photo of himself getting his suit pressed with the message, "Taking this job seriously?" His enthusiasm was infectious and completely genuine. For the first time in months, I found myself getting excited about my wedding instead of just anxious about it. David noticed the change immediately. You seem lighter, he said Thursday evening as we took Charlie for his pre-bedtime walk around our complex. Having Marcus step in was the best thing that could have happened. He's treating this like it actually matters. Unlike your father. I've stopped thinking about Dad, I said, and realized it was mostly true. Marcus has put more effort into 1 week of wedding preparation than Dad put into 29 years of being my parent. Meanwhile, my phone had been blissfully quiet. No guilt trips from Mom, no dramatic updates from Brooklyn, no last-minute demands or suggestions. The silence felt like a gift. That changed Friday afternoon. I was at the salon getting my nails done, one of those small pre-wedding luxuries I'd decided to indulge in, when my phone rang with Mom's contact photo. Hi, Mom. Grace, honey, I wanted to check in about tomorrow. How are you feeling? Good, excited, ready. That's wonderful. Listen, I wanted to let you know that your father is having second thoughts about Portland. My freshly polished nails grip the phone tighter. What do you mean? He's been feeling terrible about missing your wedding. Brooklyn told him she'd understand if he needed to come back for the ceremony. She could handle the festival events on her own. I felt that familiar flutter of hope, immediately followed by suspicion. This script felt too convenient. And? Well, he's looking into flights. There's a red-eye that lands in Phoenix Saturday morning. He could make it to the ceremony, then fly back to Portland that evening for Brooklyn's Sunday events. The nail technician gestured for me to put my hand back under the UV light, but I was too distracted to focus on the manicure. Mom, the wedding starts at 4 o'clock. Even if his flight lands on time, there's no way he'd make it to Scottsdale by then. He could go straight to the venue from the airport. It would be cutting it close, but I already have someone walking me down the aisle. Silence on the other end. What do you mean, you have someone? I explained about Marcus, keeping the details simple. A friend who offered to help when Dad bailed, someone reliable who would actually show up. Grace, you can't have a stranger walk you down the aisle when your father is trying to make this right. He's not trying to make anything right, Mom. He's trying to do damage control after choosing Brooklyn over me, again. That's not fair. Your father loves you both equally. No, Mom, he doesn't. And I'm done pretending otherwise. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but I'd already mentally checked out. Mom's last-minute attempt to broker peace felt more like panic about how their absence would look to other people than genuine concern for my feelings. After hanging up, I sat in the salon chair, watching the other customers getting pampered for their own special events. A teenager was getting her nails done for prom, chattering excitedly to her mother about her dress and her date. An older woman was getting a manicure for her anniversary dinner, showing the technician photos of the restaurant where she'd be celebrating. Normal families, supporting each other's milestones without drama or conditions. That evening, Marcus called to do a final check-in. All set for tomorrow, he said, suit pressed, speech prepared, emotional support dog treats for Charlie. You wrote a speech? Just a few words for when I hand you over to David. Nothing elaborate, but I wanted to say something meaningful about the moment. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This man I'd known for a week had put more thought into my wedding ceremony than my father had in months of planning. Marcus, I can't thank you enough for this. I know it's above and beyond anything you signed up for when you met me at the dog park. Grace, can I tell you something? Of course. I've been thinking about why I said yes so quickly when you called. At first, I thought it was just basic human decency. Nobody should be abandoned on their wedding day, but it's more than that. He paused, and I could hear traffic in the background, like he was driving somewhere. My own father wasn't great at showing up either. Different circumstances, but he had a talent for prioritizing everything else over his kids. I know what it feels like to need a parent and have them choose something else instead. I'm sorry, that's awful. It was. But it taught me something important. Sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. Tomorrow, you're choosing David, and he's choosing you. That's the real meaning of the ceremony, not who walks you down the aisle. Thank you, I said, not trusting myself to say more without crying. See you tomorrow, Grace. It's going to be a beautiful day. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, perfect Arizona spring weather. I woke up in David's old bedroom at his parents' house, where I'd stayed Friday night according to his mother's insistence about wedding traditions. David's mom, Patricia, knocked on the door at 8 a.m. with coffee and homemade blueberry muffins. How did you sleep, sweetheart? Better than I expected, actually. Good. Today's gonna be perfect. She sat on the edge of the bed like she had every right to be there, like I was actually her daughter. I wanted you to know how proud we are to have you joining our family officially. David's never been happier than he has been with you. Patricia's unconditional warmth made my chest tight with emotion. This was what parental love looked like, showing up, paying attention, prioritizing your child's happiness. Thank you for letting me stay here, and for everything you and Robert have done to make today special. That's what family does, honey. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of hair appointments, makeup sessions, and dress fittings. David's sister Emma had appointed herself my personal wedding coordinator, making sure I ate something, stayed hydrated, and didn't stress about last-minute details. At 2 o'clock, we arrived at the Desert Botanical Garden. The venue was even more beautiful than I'd remembered, with the ceremony space set up under a canopy of desert trees, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, and flowers everywhere. Marcus was already there, looking handsome and professional in a charcoal gray suit. When he saw me in my wedding dress, his face lit up with genuine delight. Grace, you look absolutely stunning. David's gonna lose his mind when he sees you. Thank you for everything. Are you ready for this? I looked around at the gorgeous venue, the guests arriving and finding their seats, David's family bustling around to make sure every detail was perfect. Charlie was already in position with Emma, wearing his tiny tuxedo and looking ridiculously dignified. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who were genuinely excited to be there, who had prioritized my happiness without being asked or guilted into it. I'm ready, I said, and meant it completely. Marcus offered his arm, and together we walked toward the beginning of my new life. The ceremony itself was everything I'd dreamed of, and nothing like I'd expected. Walking down the aisle with Marcus felt natural, like we'd practiced this moment for years instead of days. The desert setting was magical, with afternoon sunlight filtering through the Palo Verde trees and casting everything in golden warmth. Marcus had been right about David's reaction. When the music started and I appeared at the back of the aisle, David's face transformed into something between pure joy and complete shock. His best man had to steady him slightly, and I could see him mouthing "wow" from 50 feet away. The guests rose as Marcus and I made our way down the petal-strewn path. I saw David's family beaming in the front rows, my coworkers from the Tribune looking genuinely happy, and college friends who'd driven in from various Arizona cities. Near the back, I spotted a few extended family members who'd apparently chosen my wedding over Brooklyn's housewarming situation, though I'd stopped keeping track of those logistics. What I didn't see was any sign of my immediate family, and for the first time, that felt like their loss rather than mine. When we reached the altar, Marcus squeezed my hand gently, before turning to David. "Take care of her," he said simply, his voice carrying just enough for the front rows to hear. "She's pretty special." "I know," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Marcus placed my hand in David's, stepped back with a slight bow, and took his seat in the second row next to David's aunt. The gesture was so perfectly executed that anyone watching would have assumed we'd rehearsed it multiple times. The ceremony flew by in a blur of vows, rings, and happy tears. Our efficient, a college friend of David's who'd gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding, kept the tone light and personal. When he pronounced us husband and wife, the cheer from our guests felt like it could be heard across the entire botanical garden. But the moment that surprised me most came during the reception cocktail hour. I was standing with David near the bar, accepting congratulations from various guests, when Marcus approached with a serious expression. "Grace, could I speak with you privately for a moment? There's something I need to tell you." David squeezed my hand. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Marcus assured him. "I just need to discuss something quickly." We stepped away from the main reception area toward a quieter section of the garden. Marcus seemed nervous, which was unusual for someone whose job involved being poised on camera. "I wasn't entirely honest with you about why I agreed to walk you down the aisle," he began. My stomach dropped. Has this all been some kind of publicity stunt? A feel-good story for his station? What do you mean? When you told me your last name was Martinez and mentioned your father's construction business, something clicked. I knew I recognized your family name from somewhere. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a photo from what looked like a newspaper archive. The headline read, "Local business owner wins city contract." And there was a picture of my father shaking hands with someone in a suit. "This article is from 15 years ago. Your father's company won the bid to renovate the Channel 12 studios." I stared at the photo, confused about where this was leading. The man he's shaking hands with in that picture is my father, Richard Thompson. He was the station manager then, before he retired. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Your father is Richard Thompson? Richard Thompson, who used to run Channel 12? "Yes, and Grace, there's more. During that renovation project, there was an incident. A serious safety violation that could have shut down the station for weeks." Marcus looked uncomfortable, like he was revealing family secrets he'd rather keep buried. "My father covered for your dad, made sure the city inspectors didn't find out about the shortcuts that were taken, helped him pass inspections that should have failed. It saved your father's business and his reputation." "I don't understand. What does this have to do with—" "Your father never paid back the favor. When my dad asked for help with a small construction project at our house a few years later, your father quoted him double the normal rate and then delayed the work for months. My father felt used. I was trying to process this information while guests mingled nearby, celebrating what should have been the happiest day of my life. Marcus, I'm sorry about whatever happened between our fathers, but I still don't understand why you're telling me this now. Because I want you to know that I didn't walk you down the aisle to settle some old family score. I didn't even remember the connection until after I'd already said yes. And when I did remember, I almost called you to back out. But you didn't. No, because I realized that you're not responsible for your father's choices, just like I'm not responsible for mine. And you deserve to have someone show up for you, regardless of ancient business disputes between our dads." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anger. "Does my father know who you are?" "I doubt it. The renovation was 15 years ago, and he dealt mostly with my father, not me. Plus, I look different now than I did as a college intern hanging around the station. But if he found out, he'd probably assume I walked you down the aisle to embarrass him somehow, that I was getting revenge for the business with my father." Marcus was right. Dad would never believe that someone had helped me purely out of kindness, especially someone connected to a professional grievance. "Are you going to tell him?" "That's up to you, Grace. It's your family, your choice how to handle it." Before I could respond, David appeared beside us. "Everything all right? People are asking when we're going to cut the cake." "Everything's perfect," I said, taking his hand. "Marcus was just telling me something interesting about our fathers." "Good interesting or bad interesting?" "Complicated, interesting," Marcus said with a slight smile, "but nothing that affects today." The rest of the reception was a blur of dancing, cake cutting, and celebrating with people who genuinely wanted to be there. Marcus gave a short, heartfelt speech during dinner about the importance of chosen family and showing up for each other. Several guests commented afterward about how lucky I was to have such a caring family friend. During the father-daughter dance portion of the evening, Marcus stepped forward again. "May I have this honor?" he asked, offering his arm with a formal bow. We danced to The Way You Look Tonight, and Marcus proved to be surprisingly graceful for someone I'd met at a dog park. Halfway through the song, he spoke quietly so only I could hear. Your father is missing out on knowing an incredible woman. His loss is the world's gain. Thank you. For everything, for showing up, for caring, for treating this like it mattered. It did matter, you matter. As the song ended, Marcus spun me once and then gestured for David to cut in. Your turn, he said to David with a grin. She's all yours. The evening wound down perfectly, with guests gradually departing and leaving behind the warm glow of a celebration well done. David's parents handled most of the cleanup logistics, insisting that we should focus on enjoying our last moments as newlyweds at the venue. Marcus was one of the last guests to leave. He found us sitting at our sweetheart table, still in our wedding attire but with shoes kicked off under the tablecloth. I should head out, he said, but I wanted to thank you both for letting me be part of this. It was an honor. The honor was ours, David said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. Seriously, thank you for stepping up when Grace needed it. Will we see you again? I asked. I mean, now that we're neighborhood friends and everything? Definitely. Charlie and I have standing tennis ball dates at the dog park. As Marcus walked toward the parking area, David slipped his arm around my waist. So, what was that conversation about earlier? The thing about your fathers? I told him everything Marcus had revealed about the business connection, the favor, the betrayal. David listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head. So the guy who walked you down the aisle had every reason to dislike your father, but helped you anyway. Apparently. Grace, do you realize how incredible that is? He chose to show you kindness despite having legitimate grievances with your family. David was right. Marcus had every excuse to stay out of Martina's family drama, but he'd chosen compassion over resentment. It makes me think, I said, leaning into David's warmth. About what? About the difference between people who choose to perpetuate hurt and people who choose to break the cycle. That night, in our honeymoon suite at the Phoenician resort, I lay awake thinking about the unexpected twists my wedding day had taken. I'd started the day feeling abandoned by my father and ended it feeling supported by someone who had every reason to want nothing to do with my family. David was already asleep beside me, exhausted from the long day but smiling even in sleep. Charlie was curled up in his travel bed in the corner of the room, still wearing his bow tie because I didn't have the heart to remove it yet. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment I thought it might be my father, finally reaching out with some explanation or apology. Instead, it was Brooklyn. Saw the wedding photos on social media. Everything looked beautiful. Sorry I missed it. The festival was amazing. Made some incredible connections. Hope you understand. XO. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some things weren't worth understanding anymore. David and I returned from our honeymoon in Sedona to find our apartment filled with wedding gifts and a voicemail box that sounded like a war zone. 17 messages from my father, 12 from my mother, and surprisingly, 3 from Brooklyn. Charlie greeted us at the door like we'd been gone for years instead of a week, his tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled. The first message was from Dad, left Sunday morning while we were probably hiking Bell Rock. Grace, we need to talk immediately. I know who walked you down the aisle, and I cannot believe you would orchestrate this kind of humiliation. Call me back as soon as you get this. David and I looked at each other across our living room, surrounded by wrapped presents and the detritus of returning from a trip. Well, that didn't take long, David said, dropping our suitcases by the door. Someone must have posted photos, and he recognized Marcus. The messages that followed painted a clear picture of Dad's escalating rage. By message 5, he was demanding I meet with him immediately to explain my, quote, calculated betrayal. By message 10, he was threatening to, quote, handle this situation himself if I didn't respond. Mom's messages were more panicked than angry, begging me to call her back so they could sort this out before it gets worse. She kept mentioning how upset Dad was, how he hadn't slept since seeing the wedding photos, how he felt, quote, deliberately sabotaged. Brooklyn's messages were different. The first one was clearly recorded while she was drunk or emotionally overwhelmed. Grace, what the hell were you thinking? Dad is losing his mind. He says the guy who walked you down the aisle is connected to some business thing from years ago, and you did this on purpose to hurt him. I don't understand what's happening, but you need to fix this. Her second message, left Monday evening, was more coherent. Okay, I talked to Mom and got more details. If this Marcus guy's father really screwed over Dad's business, then yeah, I can see why Dad's upset. But Grace, you couldn't have known that when you asked him, right? Call me back. This family drama is getting insane. The third message from Brooklyn came Tuesday morning. Grace, seriously, call me. Dad is talking about confronting this Marcus guy directly. Mom's freaking out. Whatever happened between you two, can you just apologize so we can move past this? I was still processing the messages when my phone rang. Dad's name on the caller ID. Grace, finally, we need to meet, today. Hello to you too, Dad. How was Brooklyn's festival? Don't play games with me. You know exactly why I'm calling. His voice had that tight, controlled quality that meant he was furious but trying to sound reasonable. Actually, I don't. Why don't you explain it to me? Marcus Thompson, Channel 12 news anchor, son of Richard Thompson who ran the station 15 years ago. Ring any bells? Should it? Grace, do not lie to me. You orchestrated this entire thing to embarrass me. To get back at me for missing your wedding by having the son of a man who tried to ruin my business walk you down the aisle. The accusation was so absurd that I actually laughed. Dad, I met Marcus at a dog park. I had no idea who his father was until he told me at the wedding reception. Convenient story. It's not a story, it's the truth. I asked him to walk me down the aisle because you abandoned me for Brooklyn's networking events, and I needed someone reliable. His father nearly destroyed my company, Grace. It cost me thousands of dollars and almost ruined my reputation in this city. That's funny because Marcus told me his father covered for your safety violations and helped you pass inspections you should have failed. Dead silence on the other end. He's lying. Is he? Because he also mentioned that when his father asked you for help with a small project later, you quoted him double the rate and delayed the work for months. That was business. I had other priorities. Like you had other priorities when it came to your daughter's wedding? The conversation spiraled from there. Dad accused me of deliberately seeking revenge, of using my wedding to settle old scores, of being manipulative and vindictive. I accused him of caring more about his image than his relationship with me, of using Brooklyn as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for his choices. You've always been jealous of Brooklyn, he said finally, his voice cold. This is just another way to get attention. You're right, Dad. I am jealous of Brooklyn. I'm jealous that she got a father who showed up for her important moments. I'm jealous that she never had to beg for scraps of parental attention. I'm jealous that you see her as a person worth prioritizing. I prioritize both of you equally. No, you don't, and we both know it. I hung up before he could respond. David found me sitting on our couch, shaking with adrenaline and anger. Charlie immediately climbed into my lap, his warm weight grounding me. That bad? Worse, he's convinced I plotted this whole thing to humiliate him. That I somehow knew about the business connection and asked Marcus specifically to get revenge. That's insane. That's my father. David sat beside me, pulling both Charlie and me into his arms. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to never speak to him again. Part of me wants to make him understand that his neglect has consequences. And part of me just wants him to apologize and mean it. Which part is winning? The part that's tired of caring what he thinks. That evening, Mom called. I almost didn't answer, but David convinced me that avoiding the situation wouldn't make it go away. Grace, honey, your father is beside himself. He feels so betrayed. Mom, I didn't betray anyone. I found someone reliable to walk me down the aisle when Dad chose Brooklyn's festival over my wedding. But you have to understand how this looks from his perspective. This Marcus person's family has history with ours. Ancient history that had nothing to do with my decision. Your father doesn't see it that way. He thinks you deliberately chose someone connected to that business situation to hurt him. What I deliberately chose was someone who would actually show up for me. Someone who treated my wedding like it mattered. Mom sighed heavily. Can't you just apologize? Explain that you didn't know about the connection? Help him understand it was all a misunderstanding? Mom, I'm not apologizing for finding someone to fill the role Dad abandoned. If he wanted to walk me down the aisle, he should have prioritized his daughter's wedding over his favorite daughter's networking events. Grace, that's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time Dad chose my needs over Brooklyn's wants? She couldn't answer that question, which was answered enough. The standoff continued for 2 weeks. Dad refused to speak to me unless I apologized and admitted the Marcus situation was deliberate revenge. I refused to apologize for something I hadn't done, and for asking someone else to step up when he'd failed to. Brooklyn called several times, trying to play peacekeeper but clearly not understanding the deeper issues at play. She kept suggesting compromises that involved me taking responsibility for Dad's hurt feelings, while he took responsibility for nothing. "You're both being stubborn," she said during one particularly frustrating call. "Dad made a mistake missing your wedding, but you made a mistake too by not thinking about how your choice would affect him. Brooklyn, the only mistake I made was spending 29 years trying to earn love from someone who was never going to give it freely. That's not true. Dad loves you. Dad loves the idea of me when it's convenient and doesn't interfere with what he wants more." The breaking point came when Marcus called me at work on a Thursday afternoon. "Grace, I wanted to give you a heads up. Your father showed up at the station today." My blood went cold. "What did he do?" "He demanded to speak with me, claiming I'd manipulated you into some kind of revenge scheme against him. Security had to escort him out." "Oh my God. Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." "It's not your fault, Grace. But I think you should know that he threatened to expose the truth about me using you to settle family business disputes. He can't expose something that isn't true. The truth doesn't always matter when someone's determined to create a narrative. Your father seems convinced that I orchestrated our entire meeting at the dog park." That evening, I made a decision. I called Dad and asked him to meet me for coffee the next morning. The same place Marcus and I had met 2 weeks before my wedding, when he'd shared stories about David and we'd begun building a friendship based on mutual respect and genuine care. "Fine," Dad said, "but I want answers, Grace. Real answers about why you chose to humiliate me." "You'll get answers, Dad. Just maybe not the ones you're expecting." Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, unusual weather for Phoenix that seemed to match my mood. I arrived at the cafe early, claiming the same table Marcus and I had shared, and waited for my father to arrive so I could finally tell him exactly what I thought about 29 years of being the expendable child. It was time to stop protecting his feelings and start protecting my own. Dad arrived at exactly 10 a.m., punctual as always, but looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled. Wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He scanned the cafe until he spotted me, then walked over with the measured steps of someone preparing for battle. "Grace." He sat down across from me without ordering anything, folding his hands on the small table between us. "Dad, I want to understand why you did this to me. Why did you choose the one person in Phoenix who could humiliate me in front of the entire community?" I looked at this man who had given me life but never really given me love, at least not the unconditional kind that Brooklyn had always taken for granted. "Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I met Marcus Thompson at a dog park when Charlie got loose and ran up to him. We talked for 15 minutes about dogs and journalism. When you abandoned me a week before my wedding, I called him in desperation because I needed someone, anyone, who would actually show up for me. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence? I expect you to believe it because it's the truth. But the bigger truth is that it shouldn't matter how I met Marcus. What should matter is that your daughter needed you, and you chose Brooklyn's networking events instead." Dad's jaw tightened. Brooklyn needed me too. That festival was crucial for her career. And my wedding wasn't crucial for my life? "It's different, Grace. You've always been independent. Brooklyn." "Stop." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I'd ever used with him before. "Don't you dare use my independence as an excuse for your neglect. I'm independent because I had to be, because I learned early that I couldn't count on you when Brooklyn needed something." "That's not true." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album I'd been creating over the past 2 weeks. Screenshots of family group chats, old photos, Documentation of a lifetime of favoritism. Dad, look at this. I showed him a text thread from my college graduation weekend. Brooklyn had a callback audition the same day as my ceremony. You drove to LA to wait outside the casting office with her instead of watching me graduate summa cum laude. His face went pale as he recognized the conversation. Look at this one. Another screenshot from when I won the State Journalism Award. Brooklyn was having roommate drama, so you spent 2 hours on the phone counseling her through it instead of celebrating my achievement. I scrolled through more evidence. Christmas mornings where Brooklyn's gifts took up half the living room while mine fit in a single bag. Birthday parties where Brooklyn's friends were invited but mine weren't. Family vacations planned around Brooklyn's schedule while my work commitments were dismissed as just a job. And this, I said, showing him the group chat from my engagement announcement. The first response wasn't congratulations. It was Mom asking if the wedding date would conflict with Brooklyn's pilot season. Dad stared at the phone screen, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't realize. Yes, you did. You just didn't care enough to change it. For the first time in our conversation, Dad looked genuinely shaken rather than angry. Grace, I never meant to make you feel less important, less loved, less worthy of your time and attention. I put my phone away and leaned forward. Dad, I have spent my entire life trying to earn from you what you gave Brooklyn freely. I excelled in school, built a successful career, stayed close to home, and tried to be the perfect daughter. And none of it mattered because I wasn't her. You're both my daughters, I love you both. You love the idea of me, Dad, but you don't know me. You don't know that I hate cilantro because you've never paid attention to my food preferences. You don't know that I'm terrified of butterflies because you've never asked about my phobias. You don't know that I've wanted a dog my entire life because you dismissed that dream as impractical until Brooklyn wanted a cat. Dad's eyes were filled with tears, which should have made me feel victorious. Instead, it just made me feel tired. You want to know the truth about Marcus walking me down the aisle? Here it is. He's known me for 3 weeks, and he's shown more interest in my happiness than you've shown in 29 years. He asked about my career, my relationship, my dreams. He wrote a speech for our wedding ceremony. He bought treats for my dog. Grace, I'm not finished. My voice was steady now, calm in a way that surprised me. Marcus had every reason to hate our family because of whatever happened between you and his father. But when I called him, crying and desperate because my own father had abandoned me, he said yes immediately. No conditions, no guilt trips, no demands that I understand his perspective first. Dad was crying now, not just tears but actual sobbing. I failed you, he whispered. Yes, you did. For my entire life you failed me. How do I fix this? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. I don't know if you can, Dad. The damage isn't just from missing my wedding. It's from 29 years of making me feel like I had to earn your love while Brooklyn got it for free. Tell me what you need. Tell me how to make this right. I thought about that question for a long moment, watching this man who had defined so much of my pain finally confronting the consequences of his choices. I need you to stop making excuses. Stop explaining why Brooklyn needed you more. Stop defending your priorities. Stop acting like this was all some misunderstanding. I need you to acknowledge that you chose her over me, consistently and deliberately, and that it damaged our relationship in ways that can't be undone with apologies. Okay, yes, I did that. I need you to understand that Marcus walking me down the aisle wasn't revenge against you. It was me taking care of myself when you wouldn't. It was me choosing someone who would show up, someone who would treat my wedding like it mattered. I understand. And I need you to know that going forward, I'm not going to sacrifice my happiness to protect your feelings anymore. I'm not going to apologize for having needs, for wanting parental support, for expecting you to prioritize me occasionally. Dad nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. What does that mean for us? It means we start over, if you want to. It means you get to know who I actually am, instead of who you think I should be. It means you show up, really show up, for the things that matter to me. And it means you accept that Marcus is my friend now, someone who earned a place in my life by treating me with kindness and respect. Can you forgive me? Eventually, maybe, but Dad, forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I'm not going back to being the invisible daughter who accommodates everyone else's needs. I'm married now, building my own family with David. You can be part of that family if you choose to do the work, but you can't be part of it on the same terms as before. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had been said. Brooklyn doesn't know, he said finally. Doesn't know what? How differently I treated you both. She genuinely doesn't see it. That's because when you're the favorite, favoritism feels like normal family life. Should I talk to her about it? That's between you and Brooklyn. My relationship with her is separate from my relationship with you. Dad reached across the table and took my hand, the first physical affection he'd shown me in years. I'm proud of you, Grace. I should have said that more. I should have said that first, before anything else. Thank you. Your wedding looked beautiful. Marcus did a good job taking care of you. He did. Maybe I could meet him properly sometime. Apologize for showing up at his work like that. Maybe, if you're serious about doing the work to rebuild our relationship. 6 months later, David and I hosted our first holiday dinner in our new house. Dad came, bringing flowers for me and tennis balls for Charlie. He'd been seeing a therapist, working through his own childhood issues that had led to his favoritism patterns. The conversations were still awkward sometimes, but they were happening. Brooklyn came too, though she was still processing the reality of how differently we'd been treated growing up. She'd started asking me about my childhood experiences, really listening to my answers instead of dismissing them. Marcus and his girlfriend Jessica were there as well, along with David's parents and several friends who'd become our chosen family. The dinner table was full of laughter, good food, and people who'd earned their seats through consistent kindness rather than obligation. During dessert, Dad stood up to make a toast. I want to thank Grace and David for hosting us, and for giving me the chance to be part of this family you've built together. Grace, I know I have years of makeup to do, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to try. He turned to Marcus. And Marcus, thank you for stepping up when I failed. Thank you for treating my daughter with the respect and care she deserved. Marcus raised his glass. To choose a family and to have the courage to choose differently. As everyone echoed the toast, I felt David's hand squeeze mine under the table. Charlie was curled up by the fireplace, wearing a small bow tie that matched David's, looking content in the warm glow of our home. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. People who saw me, celebrated me, and prioritized me without conditions or comparisons. It had taken a celebrity walking me down the aisle to teach my father what unconditional support looked like. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And sometimes, the family you choose becomes more real than the family you were born into. Sometimes, that's exactly as it should be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.